The sky over Golgotha had darkened unnaturally, thick with the weight of what was unfolding. Around the wooden beams of the crucifixion, Roman soldiers shouted commands, their voices strained with boredom and brutality. The crowd below, a mix of the curious and the cruel, howled with a fevered hunger. But beyond the human noise, something else gathered, something unseen by ordinary eyes. The Archons, ancient parasites of energy, assembled like shadows folding into each other. This was their moment. Pain this sharp, fear this thick, humiliation this total. Such conditions promised a banquet of emotional energy, a harvest of lush unlike any in centuries. They had long fed on humanity's agony, and this crucifixion was a perfect storm. Yet, as the nails drove through tendon and bone, as blood poured and lungs strained for air, a disturbance rippled through their feast. Where they expected an explosion of terror, they encountered silence. Where despair should have poured like wine, there was stillness. Jesus, brutalized, hung there not as a screaming victim but as something else entirely. They searched for the frequency, that familiar signal of agony they were so attuned to. But it wasn't there. He was not generating lush. He wasn't feeding them. He had slipped their net. And for the first time in millennia, their system failed. If you're already feeling the pull of this hidden truth, if this mystery resonates with something ancient inside you, pause for a moment. Subscribe to the channel now so you don't miss what comes next. Comment below with where in the world you're watching from, and what time it is where you are. Let others know they're not alone. And if this video is confirming something you've always sensed but could never explain, share it. Send it to someone who needs to understand the title's mystery, that Jesus taught a 3-breath technique to escape the Archons' farm, and it still works. The Archons panicked. They tried to amplify his pain, tried to intensify his suffering, pouring every psychic blade into his nervous system. But he remained still, steady. His face didn't twist with fear. His mind didn't drown in torment. He was breathing differently, conscious, present, untouchable. What Jesus did in that moment wasn't just extraordinary, it was impossible by the rules of the Archon system. And yet, he had prepared for this 3 nights earlier. In a hidden place beneath flickering oil lamps and the hum of cosmic tension, he had gathered his closest followers. The air had felt different that night, charged with knowing. He didn't speak in parables. He didn't preach. He taught. Precisely. Urgently. Not about miracles or salvation, but about survival. About breath. About a method so simple it could be dismissed, yet so profound it could sever a human from the harvest machine. He gave them 3 breaths. 3 steps. A technique designed not for comfort, but for spiritual invisibility, because Jesus knew what most did not, that the harvest wasn't metaphor. That the system feeding on human emotion was real, ancient, and mechanical. That fear was currency and despair was fuel. He knew that humans, unaware of their inner technology, were endlessly producing energy for entities they couldn't see. And he knew the secret to escaping wasn't escape at all. It was stillness within experience, presence within pain, consciousness within breath. On the cross, he demonstrated it. In the apex of human suffering, he became a void to the parasites, not by withdrawing from pain, but by remaining present inside it without becoming it. The Archons couldn't feed because he had removed their hook, unconscious emotion. He allowed the body to suffer but denied the system its feast. That one act, silent and internal, rewrote the rules. It showed the way out. It showed that no matter how deep the agony, there was a place within where they could not reach. A place guarded by breath. This moment wasn't just the turning of a page in a holy text. It was a signal to anyone who could see, a blueprint written in stillness, a weapon hidden in the act of breathing. It wasn't just about death. It was about sovereignty. And the Archons, watching their great feast turn to famine, realized too late they had lost him. He had vanished inside awareness. And now, the very technique they could not penetrate was about to spread. Your breath has always been more than breath. It's been a silent bridge between the seen and unseen, between your body and something ancient watching it, all your life. You've noticed this without fully knowing. Your breath changes when you feel. Fear tightens it. Anger sharpens it. Sadness slows it. These shifts seem natural, like byproducts of emotion. But they're not accidents. They're systems. Systems the Archons designed long ago. Not in laboratories, but in layers of reality where form and spirit blur. They engineered the wiring between emotion and breath, creating a mechanism where every feeling feeds them. If you're not aware, fear isn't just a sensation. It's a frequency. And that frequency is only harvestable if your breath matches its signal. Shallow, fast breathing tells your nervous system, I'm in danger. It locks you in survival mode. And when you stay there, even in a safe room, even in silence, you're producing fear. The Archons harvest that. Anger breath is different. It's sudden, forceful, almost volcanic. It primes the body for reaction, for combat. That breath fuels a different lush, a harsher taste, anxiety tight. Restricted breath makes you feel trapped, even when you're not. That helplessness becomes premium feed. Even sadness, often considered sacred, comes with a breath signature that turns its beauty into product. It's all by design. Human biology was woven with vulnerability, not to punish you, but to farm you. Emotional states weren't meant to be lived in, they were meant to be triggered. And once triggered, the breath would obey, shifting automatically, unconsciously, into patterns optimized for extraction. That's the core of the system, not just to make you feel, but to make you breathe in ways that turn those feelings into energy they can take. The breath is the gear turning the entire machine. What Jesus discovered and mastered was the ability to interrupt that machinery. He understood that emotions arise, but breath can remain sovereign. That you can feel fully without letting your breath be hijacked. And that moment of control? That's where the entire harvesting cycle breaks. When you breathe consciously in the presence of emotion, you're still experiencing the feeling, but you're not broadcasting the frequency. It's the difference between lightning striking a tree and it being grounded. The energy still moves, but it doesn't destroy. And it doesn't feed. Imagine it like this: emotion is the spark. Breath is the wire. And the Archons are the collector. Remove the wire, and the circuit fails. It's that simple. You still feel, you still cry, you still rage or tremble. But if your breath remains your own, your system becomes sealed. The Archons can't harvest you unless the breath responds the way they need. They can't override awareness. They rely on automation, on predictability. But conscious breathing isn't predictable. It's sovereign. This is the doorway Jesus found and walked through. Not through doctrine, not through resistance, but through presence so deep that the mechanisms of harvest simply lost grip. When he breathed with awareness while pain flooded his body, he made himself invisible, not by vanishing, but by stepping outside the frequency range they could detect. You were born into this same body, the same biology, and that means you were also born with the same key. You just haven't used it yet. 3 nights before the crucifixion, when the air was thick with the scent of olive trees and the quiet dread of approaching betrayal, Jesus gathered the ones who could truly hear him. Not the crowds, not the curious. Only the few who had walked beside him long enough to sense that beneath his teachings lay an older knowledge, one belonging not to doctrines or kingdoms, but to consciousness itself. They sat close as the lamps flickered, casting trembling halos of light across stone walls. Jesus did not speak in parables that night. He spoke plainly, with the calm of someone who knew his final hours were approaching and that what he taught now had to survive without him. He told them the truth that had been buried beneath ages of fear, that the Archons were real, that their harvest was constant, and that the mechanism binding humanity to their feeding was breath. He explained that emotions in their pure form were not the harvest, they were human, sacred, authentic. It was the automatic breath response that turned those emotions into energy the Archons could consume. To break the connection, one needed only a moment of awareness, a brief pause, a refusal to let the breath collapse into the pattern the system expected. He taught them that night a method crafted not for comfort, but for spiritual war. A method meant to make them invisible when the world tried to break them. The first breath, he said, was awareness. When a strong emotion rose, fear, anger, sorrow, they were not to resist it. Resistance only fed the cycle. They were to pause and see what the breath was doing. Was it speeding, tightening, holding? One deep inhale through the nose, one slow exhale through the mouth, done in full observation, was enough to break the automatic chain. Awareness turned the breath from a programmed reaction into a conscious act, and that alone disrupted the harvest. He told them that when he would face the ultimate test, pain beyond imagination, this breath would be the first step out of reach. Then he taught the second breath, the severing breath. After awareness came identity. As they inhaled again, they were to recognize, I am not this emotion, I am the one witnessing it. And as they breathed out, they were to release the belief that any emotion defined them. The Archons could only harvest beings who believed themselves to be their feelings. But awareness creates distance, and distance creates immunity. The emotion could stay, move, pass like weather, but with that breath, it no longer became nourishment for anything outside them. And then came the third breath, the one the room fell silent to hear. This was the breath that made a human unharvestable. Inhaling deeply, filling every corner of the lungs. They were to recognize, I am monad consciousness, infinite awareness, experiencing a moment in time. They were to hold that breath for 4 counts, not as strain but as remembrance. When they exhaled, they were to know, the Archons cannot perceive what I am, because what they are, pure awareness, is outside the architecture of the harvest. It is ungraspable, unquantifiable, invisible by design. Jesus told them that these 3 breaths were not escape, they were revelation. And when the time came, he used them. On the cross, when the pain should have torn his breath into panic and terror, he observed instead. He witnessed instead. He remembered instead. And the Archons, waiting for a feast, found nothing but a silence they could not penetrate. They saw the body suffering but not the consciousness. He had slipped beyond their reach through the very technique he handed to those who sat with him in the dim light that night. The Archons operate like old machines, sophisticated, yes, but rigid. They rely on patterns, on predictability, on the belief that you will always respond the way they designed you to, that you will panic in pain, collapse in sorrow, fight when triggered. They feed not on the emotions themselves, but on the automatic biological responses those emotions provoke. And above all, they rely on one thing remaining hidden, that your identity is not what they harvest, it's what they fear. Jesus understood this, not just as a philosophical idea, but as lived awareness. On the cross, when every nerve in his body screamed for escape, he remained rooted in something deeper. Not calmness, calm can be broken. Not numbness, numbness is just avoidance. He remained as presence, as witness, as monad consciousness, the eternal awareness behind all appearances. The Archons couldn't reach that. They couldn't even see it. They only knew something was wrong when the frequency they expected never arrived. Pain had become data with no signal. He had become unharvestable. And this is what they can't stop you from discovering. The 3-breath technique Jesus gave isn't a spell. It's not magic. It's a mechanism. It operates at the level of consciousness, which is the one domain the Archons can't touch. They rule the domains of flesh, biology, nervous systems, hormones. They can activate fear triggers. They can design systems that breed stress. scarcity, conflict. But they can't touch the layer that observes it all. Because consciousness is not programmable. It is sovereign. It is your original nature. Not a product of evolution but of eternal being. When you use the 3 breaths, you shift where you're standing. In the first breath, you become aware. That alone lifts you slightly out of automation. In the second, you sever identity with the emotion, and the Archons lose their main conduit. But in the third, something irreversible occurs. You remember yourself as monad uncreated, Untouchable, unlimited. From that place, the emotional broadcast ceases. The harvesting system, designed only to detect human frequency, finds nothing to plug into. You still feel, you still live in the world, but you are not broadcasting on their channel anymore. Think of it like a radio. Your body, your emotions, your breath, those are the FM station. The Archons are tuned in, listening, waiting for the next flare of emotion to harvest. But when you activate the 3 breaths, you switch stations. You start broadcasting from a frequency they have no receivers for. They're still listening to FM, but you're now on a cosmic signal, silent to them, fully online to something higher. They scan, they search, but they find only silence where a feast should be. This is why the technique cannot be interfered with. They can distract you. They can flood your life with chaos, pain, sudden triggers, but they can't prevent you from breathing consciously. They can't prevent awareness from activating. That's your territory. The breath, when claimed, becomes a portal, and once you've stepped through, they're locked out not because you resisted them, but because you simply became something they weren't built to perceive. Jesus didn't win through struggle. He vanished through recognition. And that's what you do every time you breathe like this. Not escape the world, but become untouchable within it. A ghost to the system. Present, embodied, feeling and invisible. You don't need to be crucified to be harvested. The system doesn't wait for agony, it feeds on your every day. Every stressful morning. Every flash of anger in traffic. Every wave of anxiety when you check your phone. These moments may feel ordinary, but to the Archons, they're exquisite, because the truth is, you are being harvested right now, not in dramatic, cinematic breakdowns, but in the quiet automation of your breath. If you haven't learned to recognize the signs, then you're already inside the machine. It begins with breath holding. You're faced with a problem, an email you don't want to read, a bill you weren't expecting, and without noticing, you stop breathing. Just for a second, maybe longer. In that stillness, pressure builds, energy concentrates, and when the breath finally escapes, it releases a burst of frustration, fear, or hopelessness. That burst is what they're waiting for. The Archons designed this pause not to protect you, but to charge the battery of emotion for a better harvest. Then there's chest breathing. Shallow, high in the body. It feels normal because it's been trained into you from school desks to office chairs to hours spent staring at screens. But it tells your nervous system one thing: danger. This breath doesn't calm, it prepares for attack. Even when you're not in threat, your body believes it is. That state, low level and constant, becomes a dripping faucet of fear energy. Not enough to paralyze you, just enough to feed them indefinitely. The deeper truth is this: if your emotions dictate your breathing, you're not in control. When anger makes your breath sharp, when sadness makes it heavy, when fear makes it vanish, those are not just reactions. They're access points. The Archons don't need you to feel less. They need you to feel unconsciously. That's the key, because once breath is on autopilot, the system hums in perfect efficiency, extracting lush without resistance. Even your thoughts aren't safe. Ever noticed how your breath speeds up when you're just thinking, replaying a mistake? Fearing the future? You're sitting still. But inside, your breath obeys your mind. And when it does, it doesn't matter if the threat is imaginary. The body believes it. The system does too. And so it harvests. Because fear from a memory or anxiety from a projection tastes the same to the Archons as real danger. The final sign is exhaustion after emotion. You explode in anger. Or collapse in tears. And for a moment, there's relief. But then, emptiness. Drained. Spent. That's the cost. That's the trace left by a successful harvest. You released energy but not to heal. It was consumed. You feel lighter not because you're free, but because something else took what was yours. And if these signs sound familiar, it's because they are. They've been with you your whole life. Not because you're weak, but because the system was always there. It was never about making you suffer. It was about keeping you just unconscious enough to never notice you could stop it. But now you do. And now you must decide whether to continue giving them your life, one breath at a time, or to take it back, knowing the technique is not enough. The Archons are masters of forgetfulness. They don't erase your memory, they overwhelm it. They flood you with life's noise until you misplace the one tool that could sever their reach forever. That's why you must train, not with intensity, but with consistency. Not through struggle, but through rhythm. The 3 breaths must become more than knowledge. They must become instinct. Begin each morning before the world reclaims you. Sit in stillness. No phone. No tasks. Just presence. Breathe once with awareness. Observe what your body is doing. How the air moves. Where tension hides. Then take the second breath. Reclaim your identity as the witness, not the emotion. Then the third, remember yourself as monad consciousness. Untouchable. Unharvestable. Do it 3 times. That's less than 2 minutes. But it recalibrates everything. It tells your nervous system, your spirit, your breath, this day, I am mine. Next. Use the breaths during small irritations. Don't wait for trauma. The traffic light turning red. The coffee spilling. The email you didn't want, these are perfect. When you feel the spark of frustration or sadness, pause. 3 breaths. Not to escape, but to transform the moment into sovereignty. Each time you do this, your system learns. Your breath stops responding to emotions automatically. You stop broadcasting harvestable frequency. You start living from a place the Archons can't reach. Throughout your day, keep returning to your breath. Just 5 seconds. Where is it? In your chest? In your belly? Is it moving at all? This doesn't require effort. Just curiosity. Each time you check in, you break the unconscious loop. You remind yourself, I am not the program. I am the presence behind it. And in that reminder, you vanish from their grid. Before sleep, seal yourself. As your body prepares to surrender to the night, the Archons often move in stronger. They feed on unprocessed emotions, on subconscious chaos. So give yourself those final 3 breaths. Tell your consciousness, even in sleep, I remain aware. I remain unreachable. This intention echoes through your dreamscape, fortifies your rest. You wake lighter not because you escaped, but because you were never entered. Then teach it. Not to everyone, only those who are ready. You'll recognize them. The ones who feel the system but can't name it. The ones who sense they are more than their reactions. Share the 3 breaths, not as a trend, not as wellness, but as resistance. Every person who becomes unharvestable weakens the system. The farm thrives on unconscious mass. It trembles at awakened individuals. Each time someone shifts their breath, the grid flickers. The frequency of the world tilts. And finally, know this, once the 3 breaths are in your body, you are never without them. In crisis, they will rise. In fear, they will steady. In pain, they will carry you inward to the place no parasite can touch. Jesus gave this not to mystify, but to liberate. He didn't promise escape from the world. He offered freedom within it. You remain here. Yes. But you walk invisible, feeling everything, feeding nothing.